All right, it's 5 o'clock. If you can take your seats, that'd be great. Can everyone please take their seats? Just before we begin, if you need the washrooms, there's a little door with little stairs that creak around, and then in the basement, the washrooms are in the middle. And there's also, you can get water. So welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to come to this candidates meeting and hear what the candidates have to say. My name is Ansha Wilson, and I'm the current Vice Chair of the North Vancouver School Board. And I'm hosting and organizing this evening's candidates meeting. So in the last election, we school trustees didn't actually have a trustee candidate meeting, and I thought it was very important that a space be created to have a public meeting for our candidates from our official parties in the House of Commons. I want to acknowledge the Coast Salish people, specifically the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh nations, whose traditional lands encompass the riding of North Vancouver Capilano. We are all participants and creators of our future, but it is important to honor the value and the contributions and cultures passed down by our loved ones and ancestors. Their wisdom and survival are what got us here, and recognizing that will help us in building a healthy, vibrant community. I am a school board trustee, so I am going to take a moment to highlight the incredible work happening in the North Vancouver schools. We have 32 schools, nearly 17,000 students, and 2,600 dedicated staff. By every measure, North Vancouver continues to lead in this province. Our executive team is prudent, balanced, and thoughtful in its approach, and our education programming remains strong. We are focused on students' intellectual growth while still supporting their well-being and sense of belonging. Unlike many districts facing tough choices, we will be presenting a balanced budget and will maintain a full range of programming. This includes early learning, music, sports, drama, arts, outdoor education, Indigenous education, and targeted support for literacy and numeracy. I want you all to know that our kids are awesome and our future is in good hands. I want to recognize Pastor. I am very grateful for the parish of St. Andrews and for Judah's support to allow us to use this space for this candidate meeting. Tonight's questions were developed with input from the candidates themselves. Each candidate was invited to submit questions they would like to be asked, as well as questions they hoped their opponents would address. We ensured that key topics were included, particularly the high cost of living, driven largely by housing affordability challenges for non-homeowners, and critical infrastructure issues. To the main event. Please welcome Jeremy Cato, an award-winning journalist with a career spanning the Globe and Mail, CTV, CBC, and Bloomberg Business. He's a trusted media voice on the audio industry, a strategic communications consultant, and the host of North Shore with Jeremy Cato on YouTube. Jeremy brings deep experience and a passion for informed conversation to his role as today's moderator, and is committed to supporting more vibrant and informed politics in our community. Today we have Jonathan Wilkinson, the Liberal candidate, Stephen Curran, the Conservative candidate, Tammy Benz, the NDP candidate, and Andrew Robinson, the Green candidate. Please join me in welcoming them to the pulpit and putting their name forward to run to represent us.
That's my water. Have a seat, folks. Just so everybody knows, Tammy, Andrew, Stephen, and John. I've asked them if I can call by their first names, and they've all agreed to that. So we're going to be on friendly terms here. I have my voting card. I hope you do too. And I am amongst those people who did not vote early. But at 7 o'clock, I'll be down there casting my vote because I am an undecided voter. And so I find this is going to be a good opportunity to educate myself. So thanks, Anja, for organizing this. It's a lot of work to do this kind of thing. And all of you are here on a beautiful sunny April day, and thank you for coming inside for an hour to an hour and a half on a really warm, sunny day. It's no small sacrifice. But this is about democracy, and if you've been watching the news, I'm a news junkie because I've been a news person my whole life. Democracy is under siege in a lot of places, and it really requires people to participate, so thank you for being here. As for the actual election, the polls open at 7, so I'll look for you there. And I want to thank the candidates for coming and even standing for office. I ran for city council 2 years ago, which is nothing like running for a federal office, but I certainly understand the stresses that you feel. It's a pretty demanding thing, and there's only one winner. And that means that somebody up here, well, 3 of the 4 people will be disappointed, and it'll be hard to get over. So I admire all of you for standing up and putting your name forward. Not an easy job. Our hour today will go quickly, so let me get off with a few quick words about the format. We'll begin with a question for each of you that serves as both a biographical background and hopefully provide some insights for everyone here into who you actually are. Policy is one thing, but policy definitely does change with the environment. I'm sure that, Jonathan, you never thought that you'd be dealing with, as a government last December, with the things that almost immediately emerged. Policy matters, but it is not as important, or at least it is only as important as the character and the beliefs and the people who are trying to implement those policies, and they will change. And I guarantee you, if I can guarantee one thing, over the next 6 months, things are going to really change in our North American world. There's no question about that. So I wanted to know a little bit more about these individuals. I don't know any of them personally, but Jonathan has been my MP for a while, and now he's asking to be reelected. So we will move ahead with that. I've done quite a bit of research about who these folks are, digging into their backgrounds. And no, I did not rely on ChatGPT. I actually did research. And so these questions are not written by ChatGPT or Claude or any of these other AIs, although I do use AI tools, but not for this. We will go through those questions. The answers will be limited to 2 minutes. Our Anja will be doing the timing. She will raise your hand when it's 15 seconds left for the candidates, that you're coming to the end of things. And then we will carry on to the next thing. We'll try and keep this moving as quickly as we can. And we'll wrap with a final series of sort of fairly quick questions, and we'll see where we go from there. So at this point, let's get going. So we're going to start here. So, Tammy Benz. I was looking at your bio, and I was reading about the Women Behind the Director's Chair website and some of these other things. Tammy Betts is a very interesting person. She has, of all the people up here other than Jonathan, she has run in this riding before. Garnered 20% of the vote, pretty close, in the last election, so that was no small feat. So congratulations on that. A U of A arts grad. She's also a graduate of the Vancouver Playhouse Acting School, which is pretty cool, especially in Vancouver. Writer, director, producer, performer, script supervisor, and there is a particular comedy that got a lot of very positive reviews called Chomp.
Way Too Blonde.
Pardon?
It was called Way Too Blonde and the F.
Oh, it said Chomp on the thing, okay. Way Too Blonde? Okay. And you've been active in the Women in the Director's Chair organization, which is kind of cool. And you said in some of the interviews that you have done and some of the work you've done that you describe yourself as a social justice seeker and a lover of the arts. Communication and collaboration make you happy. So my question to you, if elected, how would your life and professional experience have an impact on your choices, your decision-making in politics? And some context in here. In the North Shore News, you were quoted as saying that probably the most favorable outcome for the NDP would be a part in a minority government. So you've been brought to this moment. How does it organize your decision-making? There's a microphone.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Awesome. Yes, so a lot of the things that you brought up are from a very long time ago. As a matter of fact, I have aged a little since university. But absolutely the social justice aspect of the theater that I produce and the scripts that I write was all about changing people's minds about things, namely women's rights, namely becoming, equal, even though we are 52% of the population. Equality would be perfect. So I think that this has always been a part of my life, whether I was doing a program or not. The things that I found out about in my community, I liked to make sure that there was something I could do about them. And one of the things in this community was climate activism, which was the big key that brought me here. Because in 2015, it was all a question about the pipeline. And we were told that the Liberals would be listening to communities affected by it and that they were considering electoral reform. So phoning people as part of Dogwood and making sure that people knew the choice, I even stood away from my own integrity saying, you know what, you might be New Democrat, but make sure you vote strategically. Well, I will never do that again. I have learned from my Greens friends that you must stand up for what you know is right. Because a few years later, of course, the Liberals bought the pipeline without consulting me, without consulting this community. And so I became outraged to know that I had worked really hard on behalf of someone else only to then be a liar, in a way. And so I decided if I'm going to stick up for anything, it will be because I stick up for it. And that's what got me here. I decided to run, especially since there's no other women out there running at this time. So that's me. I'm ready to fight for what we deserve. Thanks.
Andrew Robinson of the Green Party, you've got the microphone, so let's move to you. A University of Ottawa graduate who started out studying chemical engineering, and then you obviously had some kind of epiphany and moved to communications and many other things. So you earned a Master of Science in Environmental Change from Oxford University. So there's a couple of Oxford people here on the dais today. You now work as a consultant for the film industry. You're focused on helping productions make healthy environmental choices during production. So set design, logistics, all those kinds of things. Now, here's something that I found interesting in the University of Ottawa alumni publication. You said that at one point you found yourself working on sustainability measures for the mining sector, and you had an aha moment. You said, "It felt like I was trying to minimize adverse change in the world when I was really looking for an opportunity to be an enabler of positive change." So my question for you is, if elected, how would you be an enabler of positive change? You've been a small business person, but the federal government runs a $3 trillion Canadian economy. That's a big leap from a small business to a $3 trillion economy.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, indeed. I think that I spent a lot of time working in the mining industry and the extractive industry, and I generally found while it's important and necessary work and it needs to continue, from an environmental perspective, you're always kind of battling in terms of you're bringing in projects where communities don't necessarily ask for it. You're making compromises. There's going to be adverse impacts, and you're just looking to make those adverse impacts somewhat less bad. And I really was looking at, we need to be changing the way that we're thinking, not about how do we make things less bad and accept those compromises. Some of those things, I mean, we can't escape, that needs to continue, but what are the opportunities that we have as a society, as looking at our economy, to drive positive change, to drive investment towards the economy that we need, that makes us stronger locally, regionally, that makes our jobs healthier and is aligned with ecological principles. I did that with the mining industry. I tried to align everything with ecological principles within a certain framework, but if you take that framework off and you think about what's possible, so the film industry is a great one. It's a creative industry. They're thinking about how do I make, they're asked to do the impossible all the time. You know, you need to be in outer space tomorrow. You know, you need to be an underwater miner, and they make us believe it. So in that industry, when you approach them and say, hey, how can we look at decarbonizing? How can we look at dematerializing, reducing the impacts? They think with you, and we've been able to find solutions that have driven innovation, that have accelerated the adoption of technology companies based here in the Lower Mainland, like portable electric, battery technology. And so you're accelerating the jobs of tomorrow and creating that an industry that is fit for tomorrow. That's really how I get energized. That's what I want to see. I want us to be thinking about how we're creating tomorrow's jobs, not enabling and mitigating yesterday's.
Terrific. It's controlled over here, so you have a hot mic. Jonathan Wilkinson, the Liberal candidate for this riding, grew up in Saskatoon. I'm assuming you're a Rough Rider fan. U of S grad. At one time in the youth wing of the NDP, which was kind of interesting. Oxford Rhodes Scholars, Politics, Philosophy, and Economics. All things that take a lot of reading. Then you worked in the Saskatchewan Civil Service. And before leaving for the private sector, where you went on to Bain & Company in Toronto in a consultancy, then you moved to the West Coast and you took a number of senior roles in various environmental companies involved in the environmental sector, culminating with CEO of a company called Biotech. And then you ran for office and were elected to Parliament in 2015. So a pretty long, interesting career, I would say. I think we'd all agree on that. And this is a quote of yours that caught my attention. You were talking about what brought you to private industry at Bain & Company in Toronto. And after your time, you came there after time working in Saskatchewan's civil service under then Premier Roy Romanow. And what you said was, what I brought with me from the government side was an understanding of how to work with diverse constituencies and bring people to a common outcome. So my question for you is elaborate on what you said there and share with us examples of how you have worked with diverse constituencies toward a common outcome for the folks right here in North Vancouver.
Sure. I don't think.
Is it on?
Is it on?
There we go.
All right.
been a journalist for 40 years, so. Yeah. Is it not working? Jonathan, here you go.
All right. Yeah, so I mean, bringing together diverse constituencies is important locally, it's important nationally. I had the great privilege of serving as the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. Certainly there are many different constituencies that have a vested interest in that, whether those are environmental organizations or a range of companies. I'm now the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, and obviously there are similar constituencies that you look to bring together to have conversations to come up with common outcomes. Certainly here in North Vancouver, we have a number of important constituencies. One of them certainly is the Persian constituency, which we have the largest or the second largest Persian constituency in all of Canada. And certainly bringing people together, for example, in the aftermath of the terrible tragedy in PS 752 was something that I worked with the community on. It was something that the entire community embraced. But certainly the Chamber brings together the business community to try to have conversations about how we address some of those kinds of concerns. And often we bring in the municipalities, we bring in the province. Another good example would be the work that's being done on public transit and eventually getting SkyTrain over to the North Shore, which brings together a whole range of different constituencies. Part of being an effective MP is meeting with everybody and hearing their concerns and trying to find, when there are differing perspectives, a way to mediate those to come up with outcomes that can be commonly shared.
Stephen Curran. Nice of you to be here as well. We've
Present.
had chats at various candidates' meetings, as I have had with others here. This is terrific. U of A grad, and then McGill, I think, for law school. Is that correct? You had, from what I could find in your bio, you have some interest in politics from a pretty early age, but it wasn't hugely a big part of your life, but because you practiced law for 20 some odd years now. Worked in private equity law in New York City, then moved to Vancouver, joined a well-known national law firm in downtown Vancouver, and now you're with a law firm on Lonsdale. Now, in a publication called Bar Talk, you write about what sounds like, to me at least, a little bit of a, I don't know if it's a midlife crisis or just an epiphany or an assessment of your personal and professional status and ambitions. But it kind of happened during COVID, as I gathered. You had a lot of things going on in COVID, and I found it very interesting. And you write, I have fundamentally changed my approach to the practice of law, and you've leaned in on a strong network of family and friends in the process of what sounds like a bit of a life renewal, almost. So that really interested me. So elaborate on that a bit with a focus on what you call life professional transitions and how they would have an impact on how you might serve as the MP for North Vancouver Capilano.
Hey, well, thank you very much. I'll stand up as well too, but I'll just maybe move this over to the side so it's not in your way. So I actually forgot about that article. I did write it. I think that was around the time that I moved my practice from downtown to the North Shore. And part of the reason was that 2020 was a hard year for everybody, regardless of what your profession was, what your life was like. I think we all went through a really tough time, 2020, 2021. And in my particular instance, it was a very busy year, working remotely. Usually as a lawyer, as a transactional lawyer, you're working in teams, you're working with people, and it's a very personal and team-oriented activity. And then you go to the era of Zoom practice, and it was very disconnected, but I was still exceptionally busy. And what I learned from that episode, I had, my mother was ill at that time. She actually passed away at the end of 2020, sadly from cancer. And this made me really reevaluate what was important to me. What was important to me, not just my work, my profession, my clients, my business, but also my family and my community. And so I made the very difficult decision to leave a lot of very close relationships downtown, people that I'd practiced with, become a partner with over more than a decade at McCarthy Tetro, and made that decision to come to the North Shore and practice in my own community so I could be more connected with my kids' school, with community groups and things that were going on around me. And it was a great way to reevaluate what was important to me and also to make sure that I was able to connect with my community more faithfully. So, thank you.
Thanks. So these are our candidates for us, the voters. So thank you for those answers. Now let's move on to some more specific questions about what's going on in Canada and in particular North Vancouver. When I look at the surveys of what people are most concerned about with as their number one concern, now we all have our own individual concerns, but the number one probably in Canada, but certainly on the North Shore, is housing and housing affordability. It is a gigantic question. And in fact, I was looking at some research just yesterday from a company called The Research Company. I think that if you're going to be the research company, you should call yourself the research company. And it did indeed put housing affordability at the very top of the list of concerns of people in Metro Vancouver. So the parties represented here have made a range of promises, and their parties have made a range of promises and policies and put forward policies that are intended to address what we all know as a housing crisis. I'm sure we've all seen those headlines. Let's zero in on North Vancouver because we are electing an MP for North Vancouver. And so let's look at what's going on here in the city. The city's own housing needs report said a family of renters earning $113,000 a year cannot find an appropriate place to live if you're a renter making $113,000 a year. And if you're a family making $200,000 a year, there's nothing for you to buy. That, to me, sounds like a housing affordability crisis. This reality is hitting Gen Z's hardest. And in this campaign, I haven't heard a lot about Gen Z's concerns from any candidate in any constituency in any place. But Gen Z is probably hit the hardest right now at the very early parts of their lives, Gen Z being people 17 to 30 years old. And this crisis in Gen Z, associated with the crisis for housing, it affects all families. I'm sure there's a few folks out here who have their kids living in the basement. I've just stopped supporting my 30-year-old son in January because he's finished school and moved out and all that. So Gen Z is nearly, the systems are really huge. And if you're part of Gen Z, your average income, according to Statistics Canada, is about $46,000 a year. You're definitely not going to afford a house in North Vancouver or even an apartment by yourself. So my question to each candidate, and so we started with Tammy the last time, so maybe we'll start with I have heard very little discussion in the election campaign about the housing crisis affects Gen Z, yet the implications for all Canadians are massive. What are your thoughts and proposals with respect to the housing crisis, but in particular, how will your party's policies address Gen Z's issues? What do you advocate in North Vancouver to solve the crisis right here at home? And just a quote from Gen Z research at Elson. He sees this as a crisis in his own generation if you have, quote, an entire generation of kids who are growing up living in the basement of their parents' homes. That's not a great society. You have the floor, sir.
Value judgment, but yeah. All right, thank you. Well,
housing, the big picture, Gen Z, part of it.
Yep, housing, and in the big picture, I mean, the housing crisis is urgent and very real, and we generally, at the Green Party, view housing as a human right. We really view this as putting people before profit, and we're tired of seeing, as you adequately mentioned, or well mentioned there, that people are being priced out of the communities in which they live in. And that's something that we want to be able to address, because people deserve to be able to live in the places that they grew up and learn to love in. So the projection, and this also addresses the Gen Z issue, is that over the next 10 years there's going to be a deficit of about 12,000 homes here on the North Shore. So we've got a plan to try to address that, including developing 1.2 million affordable houses across Canada, including here on the North Shore. And we were going to define what affordable really means. So that means for people at different economic strata. It means also developing things like cooperative housing, nonprofit housing, and putting caps on the price for those housing for a good period of time. We want to ban corporate buying of homes so that it can be made accessible to people that live here, not foreign investors. And to that end, we want to end speculative investment. So tenant protection is, that's an interesting one. Tenant protection, because you meant renters. So Gen Z are likely to start at renting. So we want to make sure that there's tenancy protection in there. There's rent pricing. We want to make sure that the market serves people here, not foreign investors. We want to make sure that housing is viewed not as a commodity but as a right, and stop pricing out people in the next generation. Find solutions for them to come in through modular housing, cooperative housing that keep prices low, and so people can see a pathway to ownership. Thank you.
Now, just a quick word about format. Each of the candidates has 2 minutes, and then as a follow-up, because one of these candidates may have heard something that another candidate said that they'd like to respond to, or they wanted to add to their answer, we're providing another minute after everybody's had a chance to address this question. So, Stephen? Sure. Housing and Gen Z.
Housing and Gen Z. So I'm going to take issue with your characterization that nobody's been talking about Gen Z, because I actually got into this race primarily because I worry about the younger generation, making sure that they have a place in our community, that they have options to stay here and build their future. And I actually start many of my talks specifically with this stat that BC Business Council came out with a poll last year, and 50% of the 18 to 34-year-olds, that Gen Z cohort, are actively making plans to leave the province or the country because they just can't get ahead economically. A big part of it is indeed housing. We risk shutting out an entire generation from our housing sector. Unaffordability is just, it's really unfair. I've actually had conversations with people that I graduated with 20 years ago from law school, making good salaries, partners at national law firms. And we realized that if we would have graduated a mere 6 or 7 years later, we might still be renting instead of owning our homes here on the North Shore. That's simply not fair. And so our approach, the Conservative Party's approach, is to try and strip away as much of the government regulation and bureaucracy that gets in the way of building things quickly in our communities, building things more cheaply. There's probably also work to do on our federal building codes, which we actually use as a template for many of our provincial codes, to make sure that we're not actually overbuilding in certain communities, that we can build more cheaply. But I believe that the answer is actually trying to engage and incentivize municipalities to eliminate much of the bureaucracy that adds to the cost and the delay that many of the developers face even in our own community. And this is the way that we can spur innovation, development, using the private sector to get things built quickly and efficiently. Thank you.
Gentlemen? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly housing is a critically important issue in North Vancouver. I think the 4 issues that you hear most regularly in North Van, one is a new one, which is Donald Trump and how do we deal with the Americans. One is housing, one is transportation, and the other is climate change. On the housing side, we have a dearth of housing in this country. The federal government made a decision 30 or 40 years ago to get out of housing and to leave it to the provincial governments and municipalities. And that has led to a significant deficit that CMHC estimates as 3 million units that actually need to be built to enable us to actually have more affordable housing. And that is obviously most important for young people. Those of us who have had decades to actually chip through a mortgage are in quite a different position. Young people are looking at prices that are not affordable. So this government, when it came to power, put in place the National Housing Strategy. It was the first time the federal government got back into the business of actually trying to accelerate the development of housing. And there has been progress made, but clearly we have a long way to go. And so we need to be continuing to do things like what Stephen said, which is incentivizing builders through low-interest financing to build more homes. But we also need to be using public lands. And so what we have proposed is creating an agency that actually will own the public land and will actually itself build housing in many places across the country That will be affordable housing. That will, in some cases, be deeply affordable housing for people who live on moderate incomes. We also, as Stephen said, need to deal with red tape and to declutter and to be able to actually go more quickly. We have the Housing Accelerator Fund, which we gave $20 million to the City of North Vancouver for exactly that. It is about reducing red tape and accelerating the rate at which we can actually build housing. I think the one difference between the Conservative Party and what we are doing is we are very concerned about deeply affordable housing where the government needs to be involved if you are going to have people on modest incomes that are going to be able to find a place to call home.
Thank you.
And Tammy, how's the floor?
Yeah, you know, a lot of what Jonathan just talked about is a lot of the policies that the New Democrats are adopting as well. One of our big things is to make sure that we are building 3 million homes that are affordable and within the next 5 years. So the one thing that I think that's a bit different than the other things I've heard is that this isn't within a term, right? We've heard lots of promises that are over 10 years, 15 years, but then no one's really there when it comes time due that said the thing that they said back in 2025. And this is an ongoing issue that we face, right? There's lots of promises. And back to the comment that you made in my introduction, that's what I meant about our best government is a minority government. Because in this country, we don't have proper electoral procedures, and so it doesn't really represent the people's choices. In fact, whoever gets voted in here tonight, more people will have voted against them than voted for them because of our system of electoral procedures. So this is all part of it. It's about keeping people honest, keeping them accountable. When the government says they're going to build 3 million homes, what do we have to make sure this happens? Ending red tape, that sounds so easy. To me, why don't we just make it efficient? Why don't we just make it a better system instead of ending it all, no regulation, oh my goodness. And in terms of the Gen Z, which I will say, I hope you all are using Gen Z in this tariff war against the states. The Gen Zs, I don't really have an issue with them being in basements because I've lived in many basement suites myself for a long, long time. But I think the idea of hope, we need to have hope. They need to have something that they can think, one day perhaps I can move to the 2-bedroom with just one buddy rather than 4. So we are doing rent caps, we are ending rent evictions, we are making sure that all these policies actually get put through. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll have a 1-minute follow-up for everybody here. I would just mention one number here, 21,000. That's what the city of North Vancouver alone has to build, according to the Housing Needs Report, by 2041. This is a gigantic piece, and the district will have a similar number. In fact, it's a bigger number because there's more people in the district. Anyway, Andrew, would you like time for a follow-up here, or anything else you want to add to what you already said?
I don't know what I'd like to add to that. Just to emphasize that it's really, for us, it's about making local communities resilient, and you make them resilient when people are able to live and play where they grew up and they're able to see a future here. So we want to put people before profit by removing that kind of foreign investment thing. And also just to emphasize that there's some alignment with what both Tammy and Jonathan said here about using public lands to drive construction costs down in order to create housing stock and make it available for the next generations. So, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add that regardless of the proposal that we adopt, the policies that we adopt, I don't think we're going to see a cratering in value of property prices or housing prices in any part of Canada. Yes, supply will have some mitigating effect on the increase in valuations, and that's going to help people catch up. But what we also need is we need a vibrant economy that is going to find a place for younger people, good jobs with good paychecks, and let them keep more of those paychecks so they can build up those down payments to pay for the houses that we build. And so it's really not just a supply issue, it's a demand issue as well too. We have to empower this Gen Z, thank you for the reminder. We have to empower Gen Z so that they can make the choices for themselves once that supply does come online. Thank you.
Jonathan Wilkins.
Yeah, it is about supply in terms of moderating prices. It is about creating an economy that creates good jobs to enable more people to have access. But it's also about the type of housing you build. It's also about ensuring that there is housing that actually is accessible for people who live on modest incomes. And so the government being involved in ensuring that there is supply brought on that actually is affordable, including what municipalities often do, which is requiring, for example, in buildings that are built, that a certain portion of them essentially are rent controlled, is really important. Here in North Vancouver, we have actually put in about $135 million into housing projects, $20 million into the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is intended, as I say, to delayer and make projects work more quickly. Money into the Squamish Nation for exactly the kind of housing affordability. I was with the councillors from the Squamish Nation just a couple of days ago looking at a project that was just finished. It's really important the kind of housing we build, not just housing.
Sorry, John.
I think we're done. You have one thing you want to add? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, don't I get a
your minute? I'm sorry. And it is, you're right, Zed. I'll confess, I grew up in San Francisco. So I fall into my
We'll forgive
American every
you.
once in a
Don't worry,
while.
we'll forgive. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's so great that the governments, all parties, are talking about affordable housing because, as we all know, it's about political will where this money goes. Like Jonathan mentioned, it was indeed the Conservatives and the Liberals who ended that program. So now at least we have our attention on it. And the other thing, of course, prefabricated homes on Crown land, that's going to speed up things right here in this region, in this district. But the biggest thing, too, to remember is that right now with climate change disasters, we have had over $8 million of damage in 2024. So again, you know, we also have to think about all these things, not just let's build new homes so that they can get burned down in the upcoming fire, but what are we doing to make sure that we have a sustainable place to live in? And like you mentioned, Andrew, that it is indeed a human right. So we have to take care of this right away. Thank you.
If you just hang on to that, because we seem to have one working mic over here. So, well, thank you for those, thoughtful answers. And they didn't sound rehearsed to me. That's what I would say. So I hope everyone learned something on that. I did. The second topic that comes up over and over and over in all the public affairs surveys is the question, and it's a big one, around infrastructure. Infrastructure goes everything from transit and roads to the inevitable wastewater sewage plant. These are all infrastructure issues. So there's plenty of ways to approach the discussion about North Shore infrastructure, but I want to zero in on two issues. The first is hitting North Vancouver residents right in the pocketbook directly. The Lionsgate wastewater treatment plant is billions and billions of dollars over budget and at least a decade behind schedule. The North Shore has 8% of the population in Metro Vancouver, and we are being charged 37% of the cost overruns. And that comes to about, of the $2.8 billion in cost overruns. That means $590 a year, every year for the next 30 years, versus in some parts of Metro Vancouver, it's $70 a year for 15 years. So there's a bit of an inequity going on there. So I have two questions around infrastructure. The first one is the federal government funded a huge portion of the initial cost of the plant. What responsibility does any federal government have to ensure about any investment in an infrastructure program that it provides for the expected return, and that those of the North Shore are not charged for region-wide mismanagement? If elected, please list the ways you will take on, as an MP, the challenge of ensuring that North Shore ratepayers are not paying $590 a year, every year for the next 30 years. And the second part of this question is, and it's related, and that's why I bunched these together, If you talk to anybody at Metro Vancouver, any of the contractors working there, one of the things they all say is one of the biggest drivers of cost is getting to, from, and around the North Shore. Many tradespeople charge 4 hours up front just to come here. So obviously we're getting inflated costs. When Metro Vancouver announced its increased budget for the wastewater plant, one of the things cited was the increased costs that come with it. So a second unrelated question to the candidates is this. Metro Vancouver has argued that one of the big cost drivers for this project is the difficulty securing the workforce, that getting to, from, and around the North Shore is a big challenge. If elected, what are your thoughts on providing for transportation infrastructure to, from, and on the North Shore? I mean, the Iron Workers Memorial Bridge opened in August of 1960, and that was the very last big infrastructure project on the North Shore. Another crossing, light rail. Stephen, you want to start off?
Sure, I've got 2 minutes for all that.
Yeah. But
Okay, good.
follow-up.
Don't start the clock yet. I'm still standing up. I'm walking forward a little bit. Okay, now start it. So I'm really glad that you brought this up because this is very important to me. Part of my practice downtown when I was practicing with McCarthy Tetro for many years was as an infrastructure lawyer. I worked on infrastructure projects right across the country, whether it was roads and hospitals and courthouses, never a wastewater sewage treatment plant, but I know how these contracts work. We should, every single one of us, be very, very disappointed in how what was supposed to be a fixed cost, fixed time schedule project went completely off the rails. And we can get into the descriptions about why this happened. Unfortunately, it's subject to a lot of litigation right now, so I don't think we're going to get all the answers that we want and we deserve until this is actually taken place in the courts. But I think every single one of us has a right to feel disappointed in how this actually played out. Daniel Anderson, I note, is in the front row here. He's been a staunch advocate for more attention and public accountability on this project. I applaud the work that you're doing, Daniel. This is very important. I think we have to have strong representation from this region to lobby not just the federal government, but all levels of government for more of the cost sharing on this overrun. You know, from $750 million to $3.6 billion, and counting, is unacceptable to me as a taxpayer, to me as a member of this community. And so I think we need to have a strong voice at the cabinet table in Ottawa to make sure that we're putting the pressure on federal officials, to put the pressure on the provincial officials and on the municipal officials to make sure that we end up building this thing at the $3.6 billion, which is still not a fixed cost contract right now. It's cost plus. And so that is on the wastewater sewage treatment plant. Over onto mass transit, I think that the number of 21,000 additional units on just the city of North Vancouver gives rise to real concern about how we're going to actually get people moving around on the North Shore. We need to start planning for it now. We need to execute on it now. It's probably a combination of light rail and another crossing for that light rail to and from the Lower Mainland. But this has to get done now. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Sure. Let me take transportation first because it's obviously a broader issue. It's not just related to the wastewater treatment plant. And certainly transportation is a big issue on the minds of North Vancouverites. I would say that the long-term answer is light rail to the North Shore. That's something that all of the mayors are working on. That's something the provincial government is working on. The first step towards that is what's called bus rapid transit, which is actually separated lanes. I just announced $1.5 billion for TransLink to actually move forward with that and a number of other projects. But certainly the answer in the medium term is light rail. And one of the things we need from the province is actually a determination of how much life is left in the Second Narrows Bridge, because if there's not significant life, you would just build a new bridge that has rapid transit integrated onto the bridge, or you could do it as a separate thing. With respect to the wastewater treatment plant, I mean, look, in 2015 when I campaigned, there was no commitment from the federal government for money for the plant. And in the first budget that we were elected, we actually committed a third, just as the province did, just as the municipality did. Metro Vancouver hired Acciona, and there were a whole series of issues. They project manage it, they budget it, they actually manage overall costs. It was, as Stephen said, a fixed price cost, but clearly they didn't meet those costs. And it grew and grew and grew. And the fact that Metro Vancouver actually managed that project and was responsible for all of it, and yet they dumped the bulk of the costs on North Vancouver is unfair. And that is something that the mayors And I and others have been advocating with Metro Vancouver, and certainly I will continue to do that. But the unfortunate reality is, if you ask for more federal funding for something over which the federal government had no control, we just put money in, we don't do any of the project engineering, we don't do any of the budgeting, we don't do any of the cost estimating. At the end of the day, you would be saying that the federal government has an uncapped liability on every infrastructure project in every community across this country. It would essentially mean that the federal government would be unable to budget effectively going forward. And as a taxpayer who pays money to the federal government, I'm not sure that's something that you would be interested in seeing. So the current situation is obviously unacceptable. We do need transparency and accountability, and there is investigations that probably will have to wait until the litigation is done. But at the end of the day, the biggest answer to reduce the cost for the North Shore is to get Metro Vancouver to revisit the way they've allocated the cost, which is grossly unfair to people who live here.
Sarah. Yeah, agreed with Jonathan and Stephen Curran in the sense of transportation-wise. We absolutely need to get moving on having better ways to get to the North Shore. But to me, it's a bigger issue. As we all know, it's about affordability here. The people coming over on clogging up the bridges are people who work here, but they can't afford to live here. So how do we bridge that gap? Haha, pun intended. Because the bottom line is, no matter how many roadways we add, it's still going to be completely congested every single time unless we get to the root of the problem, which is indeed affordability on the North Shore and giving ourselves a workforce with livable wages so that they can actually live where they reside. And then, voila, no traffic. It's easy, see? But the other thing is, of course, we need light rail. Of course, we need more public transit. My question is, I work with Bowen Ma, I volunteer with her all the time, and this is a big priority for her provincially. So I keep wondering, what's been going on for 9 years? I know these things take a long time, but again, I just can't help but think, has this been the political will of the past 9 years, where we really want this to happen? So again, for me, I think it's about being on their case in Ottawa, making sure that I am listening to you and bringing those concerns over to Ottawa. We need this to happen. So there needs to be a cooperation on all levels of government. And that, to me, is where I shine, because I'm very good at communicating and delegating and linking people together to get things done. This, to me, is what I think as a woman we can maybe bring into that, is let's just get this stuff done, please. Can we get it at least started? Again, I hear promises, I hear things being said, but I wonder if that was a priority, how come we haven't heard anything further? In terms of the sewage treatment plant, I would absolutely agree with Jonathan that we can't just bail out everything that doesn't work. However, we also need to stand up for our community and make sure that any federal funding that we can get is brought in to help us as North Vancouver constituents. Thanks.
Thank you. On the wastewater treatment plant, I'm broadly aligned with what Jonathan said there. I think that it's, as a North Shore resident, I think it's profoundly unfair and unjust that as a taxpayer, the burden comes down on me. But due to the mismanagement at Metro Vancouver, I also don't think that it is the federal government's responsibility to bridge that gap. I think that sends the wrong signal. So I would expect, though, that the federal government would play a role in convening dialogue and multi-stakeholder processes to try to find a solution to make sure that there is a cap on the price going forward, and that maybe some other kind of funding solution can be found to ease the burden on the taxpayer. Because in terms of public transit, that's a big thing. It's livability. We want to live and play here, and we want to get to where we need to go on time and affordably. So let's look at the Canada Line. The Canada Line was built in 2010. It was built below budget and on schedule. And I used to live on that corridor. It took 100,000 people off the roads overnight. it really created an amazing difference in the quality of life and an ease of congestion, because it proved that if you can build something that gets people where they need to be on time, reliably and consistently, people will use it. So I'm very glad that the Liberal government has made a proposal to invest something like $1 billion, but it's over a 10-year or more time frame. That is an incremental solution that's not going to allow us to get this kind of solution, the Canada Line kind of investment that's needed to shift people and get them off the road. So let's look at different funding models to really accelerate the opportunity to invest broadly in the kind of infrastructure development that's needed to get people off the road. And that can only be achieved if you stop looking at things like fossil fuel subsidies and giveaways to major corporate donors that prevents you from being able to invest in local communities, because the money is going there and not in the communities that could benefit from that kind of large-scale, immediate infrastructure investment that will improve livability for all of us. Thank you.
Now, I'll just ask the candidates, we can do another minute follow-up here if you'd like to, or if you'd like to move on to some other questions, we can do that. It's up to you entirely.
I'm happy to give a very quick
Okay.
rebuttal. Sure. Yeah, so I think that one of the things I've learned while campaigning, this is my very first campaign, and I know that the national issues and the national leaders often soak up a lot of the oxygen in a campaign like this. When I go to the doorstep and I'm not introducing myself for the first time, a lot of the decisions are made based on what's happening nationally. But the one place that you can shine, the one place where you can make promises, is about being a strong advocate for your constituents. Now, I would bring a strong message of attention to files like transportation on the North Shore or the wastewater sewage treatment plant to try and generate attention and funding and support for my constituents. That's what everybody in this room deserves, is a champion for this constituency. It may not work. I'm not making funding commitments today about the wastewater sewage treatment plant or that I'm going to build light rail tomorrow. But I'm going to fight for this community because that's what we need. Things are getting built in other parts of this country. Things are getting built in other parts of the Lower Mainland. It's because of strong advocacy at the federal level. When there's a federal commitment, things start moving. And that's what my undertaking and promise to my constituents would be, is I will never stop fighting for you. Thank you.
So I would hazard a guess that everybody on the stage would actually say that it's important to be a strong advocate for the interests and the aspirations of your local community, and I think that's probably true in ridings around the country. What I would say is I have been a strong and active voice for this community, and I wrote actually a number of columns about impact locally, provincially, nationally, and internationally that I published in the North Shore News over the last couple of months to really articulate to people what that impact was, such that they could actually use that as a partial report card in terms of what have you actually accomplished as our MP. But it includes things like $30 billion in contracts for C-SPAN, which is the largest single employer on the North Shore, and a range of other things, small and large, across the riding. I have been, I think, and I invite you to go back and read those things, an effective advocate for this community, and I certainly will continue to fight for the needs and the concerns and the aspirations of folks who live in both North Vancouver and West Vancouver in this new riding of North Vancouver Capilano.
Very good, yes. No, I don't have anything to follow up.
Andrew?
I guess I would just follow up by saying that I think I would advocate for us to if we're wanting to really shift things in terms of like affordability and infrastructure have been stagnating, and we've been trying to micromanage an issue when it's been like a tidal wave coming at us. So I think part of it is that we need to advocate for diversity of perspectives of looking at what it is that federal government is funding and what is it that it isn't, and where are the opportunities to do fundamental shifts that allow local communities to invest and thrive. And when I mean invest, I mean significant investment that really allows, is a visioning, is about the positive future that we're looking to to create instead of just trying to manage an issue. Again, about the enabling positive change, we need to have a vision. We need to really think about where it is that we can be, and let's invest significantly. Politicians in the 30s, 40s, and 50s invested in infrastructure building for Canada. We're at that stage now. It's not a management issue. It's a visioning exercise that requires investment, and we need to look at how we're funding things at government in order to achieve that.
Okay. We're approaching our official allotted time, but before this started, the candidates' representatives came to us and asked if we could go through a series of shorter, quicker questions, and I'm getting the no sign from Anja. So what I'm sorry, she's the boss. But what I would say is the candidates are scheduled to stay here till at least 6:30 and mingle. So you can talk to them directly, one-on-one right here, and I would really encourage you to do that. I certainly will be taking advantage of that because I've got my voting card. And with that, I think, yes. Let's give everybody a minute to wrap. Yes. So each candidate, a little closing statement. And remember, they are going to be here after the formal proceedings here. And I would really encourage you to interact with your candidates for MP here. So, Jonathan?
So first of all, thank you for moderating, and thank you for organizing this. We haven't had enough of these conversations, I think, during the course of this campaign. But one thing that we actually haven't talked about, which I'm a bit surprised about, is what's happening vis-a-vis the United States. I would say Canadians often, or politicians often say that we actually, this is a great, important election. But this election is very important. Canada effectively is on the ballot when President Trump says he wants to make us the 51st state, and he wants to use economic coercion to force us to do what he wants us to do. He's not kidding. I've spent a lot of time in Washington. He is not kidding. At the end of the day, the fundamental question is, who is best placed to lead through this country through the challenges ahead? Who is best placed to negotiate with Donald Trump? Who is best placed to reimagine the Canadian economy? We will never, even getting through the tariff conversation, we will never go back to a place where we trust the United States in the way that we did before this started. We will need to reimagine a more resilient Canadian economy that doesn't have interprovincial trade barriers, that has deeper economic ties with other more reliable partners, that has stronger trade infrastructure. Leadership matters. Mr. Carney has enormous experience at the senior levels of the public sector and the private sector. If you were looking for somebody who had the credentials to lead the country at this time, you would not find somebody more qualified than Mark Carney. On the other hand, the only other person who has an opportunity to be the Prime Minister of Canada on Monday is Mr. Poilievre. He is the epitome of a career politician. He did an undergraduate degree, went straight into the House of Commons, has sat there for 20 years, has never held a senior position in the public service, has never worked a day in his life in the private sector, has never negotiated a deal of any substance in his life. At the end of the day, if you were on the board of directors of the largest enterprise in Canada, and you were hiring a CEO, and Mr. Poilievre applied, not only would his resume not get to the first interview, it would never get through the first screen because he has none of the requisite qualifications. Leadership matters. We are in a difficult time. It is going to be bumpy going forward. Leadership matters, and Mark Carney will make a great Prime Minister of Canada.
Such a good point. Such a good point about leadership does matter. And the only thing that I would just say to you all is that you are not voting for Mark Carney and you are not voting for Pierre Poilievre. You are voting for one of us. And regardless of how Jonathan makes it sound, he has had the advantage to be in government, so he can say these things with a straight face. But again, I'll say to you, the strongest our government has been is when the New Democrats were holding the Liberals to the fire. They were the ones making sure that the Liberals carried through on these amazing promises when we all were voting strategically back in 2015. In 2015, with a majority of Liberals, it serves us just as well as a majority of Conservatives. Both do not follow through on what they say they will do, and none of them have you in mind. They have the bigger corporations, they want to make sure those things are looked after, like oil and gas, which I'll bring you back to again. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have a planet, all these policies don't mean diddly. So why are we not talking about climate? I mean, we talk about our children, Gen Z, oh my goodness, they're living in a basement suite. Let's hope. Let's hope that our homes don't burn down this summer. But right now, we need to work on climate. My goodness, the Liberals would have you believe that increasing oil and gas production will actually somehow help the planet. So again, Andrew made such a good point about getting diversity into government so that we get some new ideas. Right now, in this riding, we have never had anyone but a Liberal or Conservative be the member of Parliament. It's time to change.
Andrew.
Thank you. That we didn't rehearse this, but I'm gonna dovetail on that. So I think that as Tammy said, the first past the post system that we have right now kind of really favors the two-party system, the kind of ping-ponging between Liberal and Conservative governments. And the result of that is that we lose diversity in our Parliament. And when I talk about diversity, I'm talking about different kinds of perspectives. We're losing the opportunity to have an input from a broader spectrum of Canadians. And the conversations that are lost are things like climate change, or healthcare, or housing, or Indigenous rights in a really meaningful, consistent way from a different perspective. You know, climate change, it needs to be really accelerated. We cannot have an economy on a dead planet. So we can't continue to be talking about exclusively energy corridors as a way to the future, because believe it or not, we're going to have more we're going to have more heat domes and more atmospheric rivers, and that's our urgency. You know, when Trump is gone, we're still going to be dealing with those issues. The diversity of perspectives is important because you know, for 30 years, the Liberal government had been promising things like pharmacare. It's only when the NDP got an agreement with them in this last minority government that pharmacare finally became a reality. Back in the 90s, when the Bloc Québécois became the formal opposition, which was a new thing, they were largely seen as being one of the most effective oppositions that had been seen in a generation in Canada. So that's a different perspective that really enriched the Canadian political and parliamentary process. And what we lose when in just voting for the lesser evil because we want to block a certain party away from is that we overlook who better represents our values, and it really entrenches this two-party system that is to the detriment of us all. So I really believe that true democracy thrives through the diversity of thought, and I think it's time for electoral reform and thinking about a proportional representation. Thank you.
Stephen?
So the perils of going last is that Tammy keeps on taking my best lines about Carney not being on the ballot. Thanks, Tammy. So look, I think that leadership is very important. I obviously have a different conclusion than my Liberal opponent as to the qualities and the leadership that Pierre Poilievre can bring to the position of Prime Minister. I think he's got a very good record. I think that we all no longer have the consumer carbon tax because of his leadership on that issue over the past several years. But I'll say this about the issue with Trump, because it's top of mind for a lot of people on the doorsteps. I think we need to focus less about what's on Trump's mind and focus more about what we're doing here in our country, making Canada strong. And how do we do that? We have a strong economy, we have a strong defense, we have a strong social safety network that we'll all stand up for, paid for by tax revenues generated from all of those extractive resources and other industries here in Canada that can be top of the world. But we haven't been doing that for long enough. For the last 10 years, we've fallen behind on most metrics that matter for most people in this room. That's why we need change. I keep going back to the ideas. Which party has the best ideas to actually get Canada moving in the right direction? What I get back from all of the doorsteps that all the doors I've been knocking on for the past year, I've been doing this for about 25,000 doors over the past year. Everybody is hungry for change. What does that change mean? Well, we've got a very detailed policy platform that puts us in a very different direction, one that is poised for growth, progress, and leadership on the world stage. Canada belongs in that role. We haven't been there for far too long, and a vote for the Conservative Party on Monday will help make it happen. Thank you very much.
Well, with that, I will thank you. I hope you've enjoyed this and hope you learned something, and I will turn it over to our host with the most. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Yeah. For lending his expertise and thoughtful approach to tonight's discussion. And thank you as well to the candidates. It's fantastic that you put your names forward. So Jonathan Wilkinson, Stephen Curran, Tammy Vance, and Andrew Robinson, so much thanks for stepping forward and attending here tonight and sharing your perspectives and committing to the hard work of public service. Special thank you to Pastor Judith Hardcastle and the parish of St. Andrews, and Andrew on sound for making us sound good. I really appreciate that you generously welcomed us into this space. So the candidates will be here for another half an hour, so please come and feel free to mingle, and thank you again for coming out today. I hope you have a nice evening.